everyone, and welcome to Blue Tengu's live game development show, where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry and maybe give you the nudge you needed to try it yourself. Even if you don't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some value in what we're doing here. All of our information on where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below, or in our YouTube profile for those of you who are catching us later. Just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com, btengu on Twitter, facebook.com Blue Tengu Studio, youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio for those of you who are watching the live stream, and Twitch TV Blue Tengu for those of you who are watching us on YouTube and want to catch us on a Saturday or Friday, depending on where you live. If you missed any episodes, you can always catch them over at YouTube, but you shouldn't have any trouble following along even if you haven't seen what we've done so far. Anyway, for those of you who haven't seen the show on Twitch or YouTube before, my name's Eric. I'm a game designer living over here in Japan, and I'm trying to show you everything that goes into making a game for about 2 hours a week, including all of the ums and ahs and awkward debugging moments. We had lots of those last week because I was trying to get the AI working. The reason I'm showing it all as opposed to making the game first and scripting out a rehearsed tutorial like most people do is because I want to lower the barrier people feel about making a game, and I hope inspire you to go out and try it yourself. Thank you to everyone who dropped by last week, and to those of you who've watched the video on YouTube. For those of you who are here with me on Twitch now, feel free to drop me suggestions or ask me questions at any time. I may not be able to answer them right away because I am working, but I'll try to get to them, and if I can't, please send me a private message here, or leave a comment on the site or on the YouTube video, and I'll do my best to address it next time. If any of you are out there making something and you don't mind showing off your stuff, please send me a link to it. I would like to try it. Anyway, at this time every week for 2 hours, I come on Twitch TV to work on the game Project Spaghetti, which is a top-down 2B cowboy shooter, where the bullets fired bounce around the screen with a pinball mechanic. Last week I did get the bad guys moving around the screen using a empath grid and all of that stuff in GameMaker. The only problem is that they don't move quite the way I wanted them to. I had a couple of problems. One was that they were going through collision as if it wasn't there, because I had barrels set up around the screen, but they walked right through them, so obviously that wasn't working. And two, they'd sometimes warp to the upper left corner of the screen. Third problem was they'd freeze every couple of seconds, or at least that's what seemed to be happening. I did do some post-show debugging, and found exactly what I needed to help me debug my problem, a draw path function. Basically, those paths that I was designing for the enemy AI, I could actually draw the line out, and once I did that, it's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. I was also able to combine this with the ability to see that A-star pathfinding grid that GameMaker produced, and it showed like green for the areas that you can go and red for the areas that you can't go. And combining those two, I kind of got insight into what was going wrong into my code. Definitely worth debugging that issue. The biggest issue that I had was that I was using something called path speed and 0 to stop the player moving. Unfortunately, I had misinterpreted what that meant. I thought path speed must mean how fast the bad cowboys are moving along that path. No, it does not mean that. It actually means something else, and that's what was causing them to warp into the corner of the screen. So once I fixed that, I was able to move to the next problem, which was the enemies like stopping and starting. That was also an interesting issue, but one which had an obvious cause when the path speed function was taken out, and they were actually allowed to move properly. And that problem was that I had defined the grid squares to be too big, because I was having them go after the player. And what the problem was the player was able to get into these like grid shadows, like, well, I'll show you when we jump into GameMaker, the debugging code that I set up, but like those red areas around the barrels or something, if the player moved into that, the enemy no longer had a path to the player, so they didn't know what to do, so they stopped. So my solution to that in the beginning was to shrink the grid down. But that created another problem, and I'll get to that. But anyway, the whole going through the collision thing was actually just because the center of the object was around the sprite's feet. So the path was being calculated based on the feet. So, well, actually not the feet. I think the head actually, like the top left of the sprite. So even though the path was clear, the actual sprite for the bad cowboy was a lot bigger than that, so it was able to just go right through those barrels. So the pathfinding was working, but it was just the way the sprite was going through the barrels and stuff. But anyway, that smaller grid size was fine for making sure the player didn't go off or the bad cowboys didn't go off the grid. But it did cause another problem, and that was now that the grid size was smaller, the fact that the bad cowboys have a big sprite meant that, when they were coming up to a barrel, the grid was able to get around it, but then the bad cowboy sprite was so big that they'd bump up against the barrel and get stuck there. So the original grid size I had was actually the right way to go. The problem was having them go after the player. If I was to continue having them go after the player, then it might have been worth having like another function that keeps track of where the player last was before they go into these like shaded areas or whatever. But ultimately, because these bad cowboys have guns, I wasn't intending them to actually go after the player anyway. Because what's the point of standing right on top of the player? That wouldn't be very fun if they just stood right on top of the player and started shooting them. So I kind of stepped forward to the next thing I wanted to do, because originally I wanted them to go after the player just to test the grid, but ultimately what I wanted them to do was pick movement around the screen to try and get them a clear shot at the player, just to have them moving around. So what I did was I popped down these node objects and I had them randomly pick one of those nodes to go to, and then they'd shoot at the player as they go. One thing I am going to still have to do is, right now it's kind of hard to tell when the enemies are about to shoot, so I need to actually stop them to prepare for the shooting and then have them shoot and then start moving again. It also gives the player a chance to shoot them before they get the shot off as well. So it's a gameplay thing that we're going to have to do. But first, let's jump into Game Maker so I can show you where we're at and give you a quick tour of like the changes that I made, because I did make quite a few in that kind of overtime mode that I was in. So jump to the desktop first, and jumping into Game Maker. This is the first time in a long time actually that it hasn't been super hot in the morning. In fact, it's actually kind of chilly, so I don't have to run the air conditioner. Hopefully that means my voice actually lasts a little longer, but I'll keep drinking water to make sure. Anyway, where I'm at now is, as you can see, the bad cowboys are moving around the screen. They are shooting, and they aren't going after the player, they're going after another location. I can still shoot them. And there we go. Also, I do have three other things that I did set up. One is if I press the F3 key, the cowboys no longer shoot. So you won't see them firing now that I've pressed the F3 key. You can't see me pressing the F3 key, but that's what I did. Also, that debugging stuff, before I was, constantly commenting it out of code and putting it back in and stuff like that, that was, that's kind of tedious, and I may need to do this stuff in the future again to debug this. So what I did was I picked keys that I wasn't using, easy to remember keys, and assigned different debugging functions to them. The first is F1. If I press F1, what it does now is it shows, those red areas are the areas that are off the grid, areas that they can't move. As you can see, the grid's quite large. And what it is right now is it's set to be twice the size of the sprites in terms of width and height, so that there's no way those bad cowboys get stuck on stuff. I also kind of moved the barrels around to try and make them a little more efficient. I could probably move that one in the upper left a little bit as well, so that it doesn't take up so much screen space. And those little black dots on there are the nodes that I've set up. I've just kind of set up a very basic pattern where it's like they're just kind of around the screen in a pattern, and I've left the middle out because they're going to be walking around the middle all the time anyway. There's no point in having them go to the middle and stop there, because that's not very good for shooting at the player anyway. So that's what the F1 key does. It turns that on and off so that I can tell what they're doing. So if their behavior is kind of screwy, or I decide to change it later, I can always look at that real easily. I also added something to the F2 key last week. I did have, I think it was last week, maybe it was the episode before that, but I had it might have been the episode before that actually. So episode 7, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube. The bad cowboys shoot, and I wanted to make sure that they shot the same way the player did to make sure that it was fair. The easy thing to do would have been to have them just find the player and shoot at what the player was, but the player can't do that. The player can only shoot in 8 directions, so I had the bad guys also doing that. And to show where they can shoot, I added this. This just draws a line in the 8 directions they can shoot. I figured that would probably come in handy later, but you know, it was easy enough to do. So those are the things I've set up. Also, I did fix one of the problems because I figured out exactly what was going wrong. As you can see, my high score is going up. 400. Well, actually, that's no good. I need to actually die here. Well, I could have shot myself, I guess. Okay. So let's say I get to 300. And I get game over. When I start a new game, that high score stays there. That was one of the bugs I had. Well, not really a bug, but it's just a feature I didn't finish implementing before. So I did implement that because I figured out exactly what was going on. So let's go through GameMaker and show you some of the things I did. One thing, let's see, the objects. I added a new object, well, 2 new objects actually. One was the move node, which are those little like black dots. They don't actually have a sprite. I just drew, used a GameMaker function when I hit F1 to draw a little black circle where they are, but they don't actually have a sprite. And all this is, if this is true, draw the node. But what these things are is in the bad cowboy logic, I randomly select one of these nodes, tell them to go to it, and then when they reach it, I have them select another node and pick that. I also have a little bit of logic so that the bad cowboys don't group together too much. If they do get a little too close, then I have them recalculate another node and wander off for a few seconds. That's something that can be adjusted. Maybe I don't even need to do that, but the move node is one object I added. Another object I added is the room manager. So what this is I split out, there's the system object, which right now only executes like the global stuff, and it also has all of those debug functions. It also, because it's executing globals, I kept it persistent, which means that even when the room changes, this object still exists once it's created. And what that means is it could keep the high score. So, all those global variables, it keeps them. One thing I am going to have to be careful about is that I have to make sure to erase those global variables. If I decide to go into a new room or start the game over or something, if they're tracking something that needs to be erased. And then I split off the room manager function, and the room manager was basically, for that screen where I was doing the screen with the town and the barrels and everything else, dropping like power-ups every 20 seconds or whatever. It's handling that. It's also creating the grid, so I only have to create the grid once. Save me a little processing power. Yeah, and that's the drop code. So by splitting those two out, that's what allowed me to get the high score to carry over. It also helped me to only make the grid once. I don't think barrel, bullet, or anything like that changed. The biggest changes were in the bad cowboy. Some of the things I changed here. I also added some comments so that I know what these things are doing. Probably a good habit for me to start getting into. But like one thing, for example, I added a variable for hold distance, which means if they're within this distance of something, to respond. Also new node. This is like if they come close to a bad cowboy and they've recalculated a node, I want to have a cooldown on that so that they're not just like, janking around trying to find new nodes when they're constantly in contact with each other. And the EM move node is what actually stores that node that they're going towards, their objective. Also, I added a shooting delay so that when they start the game, they're not automatically shooting at the player. Like, that'd be the worst thing in the world if you just, press start and all of a sudden a bullet's flying at you and you don't even know how to control the character. So I have that set right now for 5 seconds, 5 seconds before they're allowed to start shooting. Doesn't mean they're going to shoot at 5 seconds. It just means that's when they're allowed to start shooting. Let's see. Step. I think step is where I did most of the heavy lifting here. A lot of this is the same as last week, but I did take out this debug message because it was too much. But like, the first thing here is if they've reached close enough to the new node, remember that EM hold distance that I mentioned, if they get close enough to their objective, then take all those nodes, randomly pick one, and this is just if the debug switch is on. I have debug messages, but randomly pick a new node if they're close to their current destination. The next thing is if there's no path, that's actually a very bad thing. There should never be no path now that I'm not following the player. But if there is no path, then at least display that. And obviously they can't move along the path, so just end it. See, this is what I should have been using before instead of that path speed function. If there is, let's see, let's go through this. If there is a path to where they're going, then this is just for future reference. Maybe I'll want to change this, but if they're close to the player right now, all I do is say you're close to the player and no debug message. That's it. They don't respond to the player anymore. If they're close to one of their fellow rivals, I want them to kind of recalculate a new node and try and get away from their rivals, because otherwise they'll end up like starting to shoot each other and firing multiple bullets and stuff like that, and that's no good. And then if none of those conditions happen, then just start them along the path. But in general, the only time I end the path is if they don't actually have a path to go on, so they're constantly moving. I will probably want to add something in here where if they're about to shoot, if they're shooting, if they've just finished shooting, that brief window. Probably also want to add something in there so that there's a bit of a cooldown. It also gives the player a chance to respond. Okay, this enemy is stopped, which means they're about to shoot at me. So that's some logic I'll probably be adding. Let's see, begin step. I did add some stuff in begin step as well, and that's the shooting code. The things I added in here are, I used a GameMaker function called collision line, and what that does is it fires out a line from these coordinates to these coordinates, which right now is the bad cowboy to the player. And if on that line there is a barrel object, then I want it to return that barrel object's ID, which is always a positive number. If there is no barrel on that line, then it returns a negative number. I think it's -4 actually in GameMaker. I think that's what it means, what it's trying to use as null. But anyway, if there is no barrel on that line, then it's okay to shoot, because the enemy shouldn't be shooting at barrels, because that bullet is going to come off the barrel and hit themselves. So it makes the enemies really suicidal if they don't do that check. Also, it makes them homicidal if they don't check for their fellow bad cowboys, so I also added that check. So now they only shoot if, they've got their random start to shoot. They've decided, okay, this is my time to shoot. They check for barrels. If there's no barrels, then they check for enemies. If there's no enemies, then they finally shoot. And that's all this stuff. This stuff I did in episode 7, which is calculate an angle, one of those 8 directions, and shoot in that direction. So that is, pretty much all the stuff that I did in the meantime. Also, I figured out, if I use a draw event, before, when I was ever trying to do stuff in here, it would always like make the character disappear, the player disappear, the bad cowboy disappear. The thing is, GameMaker, if you don't have an draw event, what it does is it automatically draws self, But once you add this, it stops drawing self, so you just have to remember to make sure to add this in there if you have debug code, which I added in. This is that 8-directional, F2 debug code and stuff. Also, the motion path is in here. And let's take a look at the room itself. As you can see, these question marks are all these nodes that I've added. This is the system and room manager that I've added up here. Also, I figured out how to stop having this editing problem where it's like I could never select the stuff in here because this border, this collision border that I have around the side was always on top. To fix that, there's this icon up here that chooses instance order. Now this isn't just for the editor. You have to be very, 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 very careful with editing this because it causes all sorts of screwy things to happen. The stuff at the top is the stuff that goes in first. It's also going to be on the editor, the thing that's behind everything else. So right now, the very first thing I want to have happen is system, because system has all my global variables, and player, bad cowboy, all of those in their create instance use those global variables. So if system is lower priority than the other stuff, then I start getting errors. So this has to be high priority. Players next, borders next, and then the reason I have room manager after the barrels is because the room manager is creating the grid, and if I have them after the barrels, then all of a sudden they disappear from that grid and enemy cowboys are able to move right over them. It's a little tricky. Like, I would imagine that in this instance order there's a lot of ways to kind of screw yourself. I did see tips online that it's a good idea to try and avoid as much logic in that create function as possible because of this. But anyway, and then the lowest priority things are move nodes because those can come last. But by using that trick, not really a trick, using that feature, I'm able to now select everything on the screen without, running into that problem I was having before. So that's where we're at now. Let me jump over to the Trello site. Trello.com. I usually put this link up in the YouTube annotations, which I'll probably do right now for a few seconds. But I did find out that if you do a Google search for Trello and Project Spaghetti, it actually comes up, so you can jump. That's probably the easiest way to come here if you don't actually have that annotation or some reference. It's also down, I think, in the Twitch FAQ. So you can actually come to the site. It is public. I tried to make it where you could vote on stuff, but for some reason it doesn't allow that. But these burn down numbers also, I figured out that if it's not me, because I have a plugin that I've added, I think it was Scrum for Trello, that takes these, if you look at these actual tasks, what I'm doing is I'm putting in parentheses the time that goes into them, and this burn down plugin takes that time, puts it down here, and calculates it up, at the top here. So it allows me to, automatically do a lot of that Scrum and Agile stuff. But unfortunately, if you don't have that plugin, then you don't actually get to see that. You just see the numbers on the cards. So if this site looks different than what you're expecting, that's why. But anyway, the links are on the YouTube annotation or down in the Twitch feed, or you can search on Google for Trello Project Spaghetti. Episode 8, which was last week, I had the bad guys finding a goal. And for episode 9, what I had scheduled was fix the cowboy action movement, which was first. I did 2 hours of it before, and then I had, an hour left over. Did all that in the interval because I didn't want to, sit here for 3 hours showing you just, searching websites and debugging and stuff like that. That's not very interesting. Which is why, I just explained it after the fact and got it working. So what I did was I added a little category called Episode 8 Overtime. The reason I did that was because for Scrum purposes, I do want to track my burn down properly. If this was a full-on project, a lot of development projects that don't use Agile properly, they get into trouble because, I mentioned it a little bit last week, crunch, the whole working overtime to get things done. When you're using Agile, you do want to keep very close track of how fast you're moving through tasks, and if you do overtime, for me, my theoretical, core time per week is those 2 hours on Saturday. Right now, basically, those 2 hours where I'm actually doing work. If I do anything beyond that, then that's overtime. On a regular project, it'd be 40 hours a week is your core time, and then anything beyond that is overtime, minus meetings and all that stuff. But if I just add these tasks to episode 9 or whatever, then I suddenly have this inflated, in 2 hours I got all of this done. And I don't want to show that because that's going to screw up my calculations. Then I'm going to start thinking, wow, I can get all of this done in 2 hours. And so I'm going to start, overestimating how much I'm going to get done by my deadline. You don't want to do that. You want to be honest in how much time things are taking you so that you can tell in the future, this is going to take X number of, days or weeks or whatever to finish. Projects do get into trouble with that. It's easy with the 2-hour thing, but like, most game developers are used to working overtime. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's embedded into the whole like being a game developer thing. But when they do, say, in 2 weeks, Agile calls it a sprint, these little periods before you go into reviews and everything else. My 2 hours is their sprint, basically. The sprint is calculated to be 40 hours. But they do all this overtime, and so it looks like they got all of this done in 2 weeks. So then the project manager starts looking at it, and they probably understand that there's overtime in there, but it's like, nah, all right, well, this is what they're getting done in 2 weeks. Problem with that is when you do finally get to the end of the project and you do have stuff that you absolutely need to get done beforehand, suddenly you've got all of these tasks that you're assuming can get done. So you've basically, instead of 40 hours, you've got 60 hours. You're expecting 60 hours worth of work. On top of that, you have all of these debugging things and everything else that gets added to that you absolutely have to get done. So even though you're using Agile, you kind of like shoot yourself in the foot. Don't want to do that. The reason, this is kind of a mini version of Agile, but I did add this episode 8 overtime card in here. This is basically like an extra episode because I did take about 2 hours to do all of this stuff. So, and also the checking line of sight before shooting, I did that. And also I brought this down from here, but because I figured out how to do the high score, keeping track across sessions, added that in there. So that's an overtime card. So in about an episode's worth, I did about 4.25. Let me also put that in because I think it wasn't 2 hours, it was probably closer to 4 hours of work. So I want to make sure I keep track of that and burn down. So now, because I got the movement stuff more or less working, I can probably brush that up later. So I do want to add a brush up task in here. And let's make that 2 hours because that's anything AI related, as I figured out over the past couple of weeks, is actually very complicated, so I should overestimate the tasks to try and get more accurate. So now this week, what I want to do instead is that enemy pattern task. This is, right now, all of the enemies, there's just 4 of them. They just start on the screen, and they're free to move and start shooting and everything else. That's not very fun. What I want them to do is come from off the screen and, have a pattern. Like, if it's the first level, I want it to be pretty easy. So I want to have, bad guys, maybe 1 bad guy coming off for a few seconds, then maybe 2 bad guys coming off for a few seconds. And I want to be able to define that and have a limited number of bad guys before you win. So I'm going to need... Also, because you need to know where those bad guys are coming from, because if you're walking around the edge of the screen and just suddenly a bad guy's there, that's not very good. You want to kind of know where they're coming from. A good example of what I'm going for is if you remember the game, well, actually, did Golden Axe do it? It might not be Golden Axe, it might have been like Streets of Rage or one of those games that did it, or a couple of games that did it, but usually they would show like a little arrow that shows where the enemies are coming from. Recent example. Let's go with a recent example because of some of you may have not have played Golden Axe. That's kind of dating me a little bit, but like Castle Crashers, for example, they probably have a little arrow that shows where enemies are coming from, or not Castle Crashers, but there's Sacred Citadel and a few other games that I think have done that, where it shows an enemy is about to come onto the screen with an arrow. So I need to draw that arrow and then I need to implement it. And one more thing that kind of ties into all that is if I have defined my number of enemies that are coming onto the screen, if I kill all of those enemies, it should allow me to win. In other words, to move on to the next stage or move to the victory screen or leaderboard screen or whatever I want to do, but at least have a win condition. Because right now all that happens is enemies come onto the screen, I shoot them, and then there's just nothing for me to do. I'm just stuck there. Kind of want to fix that now. So the first thing is enemy pattern. I probably had this overestimated, but according to my past burn down, about 2 hours worth of tasks is about right. I made a note over here. After 8 weeks, dividing it out, my burn down is about 2.4 per episode. Probably a little lower because of this overtime thing. Because I did 4.25 hours worth of tasks in 4 hours, so probably dropped a little bit. So, 2 hours an episode's about right. It's still, more than I expect because obviously for the first 30 minutes I'm sitting here kind of explaining things and explaining the show and everything else. So I actually only have, an hour and a half worth of work every week. And I'm having so much fun I'm spilling water over myself. Let's see. Town level enemy pattern. To implement this, the first thing is they have to start from off the screen. Right now, they're just there. So I need to have them start from here, walk onto the screen. So to do that, I'm also going to want a little bit of randomness. I don't want the same pattern every time because players are just going to remember that pattern. And it's not that kind of game. It's more of just testing your shooting skill as opposed to your pattern memorization abilities. This isn't like Mega Man or something. Pattern memorization is not what I'm shooting for. So what I probably want is to create, kind of a grid. They can't come from up here, by the way, because that's where the town is. But I probably want to create a grid where they can start in any of these like locations. And then they're going to want to select the closest node to that location. That's probably going to be the trickiest thing. Well, I don't know, I think there's actually a game maker function that'll help me, which will select the closest object of a certain type. So maybe I can get away with that. But what this means is because they're also going to be coming from the left, I need to shift all this over, which means I'm going to finally have to start fiddling with like room views and everything else. So that's going to make things very interesting. Let's see. What does this do? Give me a tooltip. Shifting all instances. Well, let's see what this does. Let's see. To make calculations easy, probably want to shift it by an easy to remember amount. Let's see what this does. Oops. Just added a bullet. Don't want to do that. The next thing I want to do is shift the background over as well. Style, horizontal stretch. Wow, there's no way to move this, I guess. That's odd. I mean, I guess I could just overdraw it. Alright, well, let's see. Let's undo. Oh, that's right. Game Maker only allows me to undo one thing in the GUI editor, so Alright, let's shift this back a little bit. I did 120, but let's shift it back a little bit. Actually, 60 is not going to be that easy to remember. So let's shift it back to where it was in the very beginning here. And to keep it easy to remember, no, actually 60 would be a good idea. Well, let's go with 48. Because that's the size of these sprites with 48. That should do what I need it to do. Yeah, it's unfortunate that I can't move this background, because that would make this much, much easier. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, I probably don't want to edit it in here, do I? Don't want to keep the aspect ratio. I just want to move it to the right by 48 pixels. 688. And shift. Okay. I also need to shift it down. Let's just remember how large these sprites are. One other thing I did do is to avoid having that problem where the sprite, the object is up here, the object coordinates up here, but the sprite's like kind of drooping off of it. I changed the origin for all of these sprites to be in the middle to make calculations easier. So height is 42, which means resize canvas. So I need to add 42 to this. Yeah, so 522. Hopefully I don't mess up the math somewhere. And I need to shift that down by 21. Okay, well, let's see if that does it. Actually, no, I didn't need to do the vertical thing because they're not going to come from the top anyway. So actually, let's undo at least that much. Make my job a little easier. Let's do that again. 688. Shift by 24. Okay. And let's see what that did. Backgrounds. Wow, that's unfortunate. View in room. Port on screen. I don't know if I have to start doing this right away. Okay, that's a little weird. Don't know what GameMaker wants me to do here. If you're gonna make it this much of a hassle, it would be nice if you just allowed me to shift the background. Let's just see how this plays first, to make sure I'm not screwing up any of those parameters. Yeah, that's great. View in room, port on screen. Visible when room starts. Maybe I don't have to use views. Let's see. No, I guess I do have to use views. Okay, well, it looks like I do have to use views. And visible once room starts. Let's see what that does. Yeah, it's still showing the left for some reason. Maybe this is what I'm messing up on. Okay, now I just have all this extra stuff on the side. Views, port, 640 by 480 the view. View in the room. Let's set this back to 0 and see what happens. No, yeah, I had it right. That's too much. 0 is there. 24 is there. 48 is there, but I have all this extra stuff on the side. That's how large my window is. I don't think I want that changed. Don't want to deal with tiles. Oh, okay, I need to change this back. So 640 by 480. Then it shifts the background to fit that, doesn't it? Well, let's see. Views. Zero. It's not what I want. Wow, this is a real hassle, isn't it? Because it unfortunately sets the background. It's helpful in terms of moving the background to fit the size of the screen, but it's not generous enough to let me move the background around. Wow, that's unfortunate. That is really unfortunate. That's something this trivial has to be a hassle. That's a lose. Well, alright, let's shift all instances. Do I want to move it left again? Yeesh. Alright, let's try a few things. Just gonna have to experiment to see what combination of these things is gonna do the right stuff for me. Wow, that is annoying that it keeps dropping my tooltips away. So the setting, now I'm thinking that's gonna be the final game setting. So I want that to be 640 by 480, don't I? Don't understand why this view is working the way it is. But let's see what this looks like. For some reason, that's fine. It's really, really weird. I don't understand why this is working at all, really, because I have this view that's going from x48 to 640. When what I'm thinking in my head is that, because I'm shifting it right 48, this should be 688. But then suddenly that shifts it way off the screen. No idea why this is working, actually, so I'm going to look it up, after the episode and try and get to the bottom of why this is so weird. But it appears to be working. I don't know if it's stretching stuff or not to get it to work. Something fishy is going on, obviously, but if this is the setting that works, this is the setting that works, so I will go with it. Okay. 688. And actually, I need to increase this room even bigger. So let's calculate this, since I don't trust my math in the morning, even though I've had a little bit of coffee. 736. 736. And I'm going to need to add 42 to the height. 522. And for some reason the view is still fine, so okay, well, let's save that once. Let's save this project. And actually, let me make another backup here so that I can get back to where I was, just in case this screws everything up. So let me check the game one more time here. Yeah, looks fine. And the next thing I want to do is have these enemies appear off the screen randomly. So I want to create a new object called, let's see, enemy node, that determines start points for enemies. I don't want it to be persistent. It's obviously doesn't exist, so it doesn't need to be solid or anything like that. It just needs to be laid down. So, enemy node, drop those in here. Could probably have enemies coming in from there, from there. Should probably calculate these a little more carefully, but for now, I'll keep it sloppy just to make sure it works. I probably don't want them coming like right from the bottom because that's where the player's likely to be, but I could always add that in later. So these are my possibilities for where the enemy can start. And I've tried to lay them down in a way that they're close to one of these nodes, closer to one of these nodes than another one, so that they come straight out. So now, when the room starts, let's see, do I want this to be in the step? Probably. So one thing I want to do is create a variable. Do I? How am I going to set up the times schedule? That's actually an interesting issue. Because what I want to do is I want to have it timed, and I want to be able to script out the time and say, you know, enemy 1 comes in at X number of seconds, enemy 2 comes in at X number of seconds, enemy 3 comes in at X number of seconds, you know, and be able to change those. So I probably need like an array or something of variables that fit with the room. So I'm going to need to figure out how to do that, and that seems like a good place to take my break. I will be back in a few seconds. While I think about that, I should be back in about 2 minutes for those of you who are watching this. So I will be right back. And I'm back from my break. Microphone's working, good. Where I'm at now is I'm adding these nodes outside of the screen where the enemies are going to come up. And I actually do need to calculate these a little more appropriately. Because otherwise you'll see part of the enemy kind of sticking out of the screen, and that's no good. Let's see, that's not what I want to do. Yeah, I guess 0 is the way I want to go then. Change all of these to 0. And change that to 522. Let's make this a more round number. That's odd. Even though my background is 522. Yeah, that's really odd. 522. Let me just see something really quick here. Alright, well, don't think that's what I want to do with that. I don't think it's 480, is it? Yeah, that'd be weird. So I have to go midway between those two. Let's see, 21. Yep, okay. 501. And I want these to be on the edge of this right edge of the screen. So that's 22. Let me make sure these are the same height too. Four 420. This one is 290. This one is 175. Yeah, something weird's going on. I can tell. I can really tell that something weird is going on with these numbers. It's like it's stretching it or it's doing something for me, and I don't see what that is. So that has me a little worried, but anyway, it's enough to get me started. So hopefully if I start an enemy there, they'll appear off the screen, which is fine. So I guess the first step would be to get rid of these enemies. Whoa, 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 whoa. No, 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 no. That one. Okay, so now the player is alone in this room, and I want to have enemies spawn at these points and move to the closest move node. So rather than worry about like timing and stuff like that, the first thing I want to do is to create a system that gets an enemy to spawn at one of these points and move onto the screen. Then I can expand that out to something else. I don't want to do too many tasks at the same time because got to make sure that one thing works before moving on to something else. So I've got these enemy nodes, and let's see, a good example of what I need to do is probably actually going to be similar to getting them to move around. And that's finding all of these enemy nodes and picking one. And all of that's going to take place in the room manager. It's probably going to be a step thing at the end of the day. So if actually room enemy spawn equals 1, let's do that for the beginning. So if it's okay to spawn an enemy, and since I want it to be okay to spawn an enemy, I'm going to start that at 1. And to make sure that it's not constantly spawning enemies, I'm going to set that to 0 when it does spawn an enemy. And to make sure that it can spawn multiple enemies, I can never remember where random is. Into control, there it is. No, that's not what I want. I want an alarm timer. Let's see. What was speed for the game? Room speed. That's right, room speed. Let's go with alarm 0. Room speed times, let's have an enemy spawn every 5 seconds. So I need to create that alarm in here, which will set that variable back to 1. So now every 5 seconds it sets that variable back to 1 after it does this. And this is where I need to do the heavy lifting of actually creating an enemy and putting them on that room node. Thankfully it remembered that. So let's see, em spawn node. Let's go with room spawn node. And these are enemy nodes as opposed to move nodes. To get into the habit of commenting, I think I will start doing that from now on. And it'll help you too because you can see what I'm doing here as opposed to having to listen to me as well. That needs to be, well, node count's fine because node count's a local variable. So it should pick one of those spawn nodes to go into here, and then I want to create an instance there at that location. I think it's just instance create, but let me, yep, rm spawn node. I want it to create it at that node location. And the thing I want to create is a bad cowboy. That's something I'll also have to address later because I'll have things other than bad cowboys that I want to make, but for now, let's just go with bad cowboy to keep this simple. And the first thing I want that bad cowboy to do when he spawns at that location is to move to the closest room node. Does instance create return something? I hope it does. But I have no idea if it does or not, so that's something I'm going to have to look up here. Hopefully it returns a handle for that instance that it just created. Excellent. Okay, it returns the instance ID, which is exactly what I want it to do. So that is the enemy that was just spawned. And I want to set that enemy's first movement node to be the closest node. What is it called? EM move node. Okay, and I want to set EM new node to 1 probably. No, well maybe not. We'll think about that. EM move node. And EM move node. Just have to remember that by the time I get down to here. EM move node has got to be the closest node to its location. So now I need something to find the closest instance. Instance nearest. Let me just make sure that that does what I expect it to do before I trust it. Returns the ID of the instance of type object nearest to XY. Okay, that's exactly what I need. So let's see, rm new node equals instance nearest, and that's got to be new enemy X, enemy Y, and the thing I want to find is move node. So this should find the nearest move node to the enemy and put it into that enemy's first move node, hopefully. And let me type that out. Okay, well, theoretically that should work. Theoretically. Probably get some errors here. Create event number 3, line 1. Well, yeah, that would do it. I don't even know what that came from. And I have some more errors I have to take care of as well. Nope. Okay, enemy path. Because there's no enemy path yet. Is that why that's having problems? Yeah, not quite what I was expecting. Let's see. I think it might be something in here that I'm doing. Let's say that they've already, when they're first created, they have a new node. And I want them to only calculate the next node when they reach that first node. So that's one problem I think I need to take care of. Yeah, for whatever reason they're going over here, which is weird. That random thing's not working the way I expect it to. This is just because the enemy path doesn't exist yet. So let's fix that first. And this will get overwritten pretty soon, but hopefully that fixes it. Okay, well, it does look like they are picking the closest node when they first start. Let's turn off shooting here. Kind of. And also these barrels aren't getting added to the path that they're using, which is really weird. That should be the only time I'm doing that. Let's put all of that into the create step too. At least that way the barrels show up properly. At least prevent the enemy from getting stuck on stuff. It doesn't seem like they're picking the closest node. It seems like it's getting overwritten really quick. So I've got EM new node set to 1. What does that do? If distance to object is less than roomless. It's probably that, actually. Maybe I should just set this to 0 so that they actually go to the node. Well, let's give it a few pixels at least. A flexibility. So I think what's happening is they're starting out and they're already so close to that start node that they just pick the next one right off the bat. Yeah, that's what was happening. I think. Let's make sure the other enemies do the same thing. Yeah, okay, that's what was happening. Off screen, the enemies were, because of the way I had it set up, was if the enemies are within a certain distance from their destination node, they'd pick a new node. So what it was the enemy was already so close to that basically for half a second, you know, it would probably calculate that, but then like the next frame, it determined, yeah, I'm too close, pick another node. And that's what that was. So now they are doing that properly. Unfortunately, they do seem to be forgetting the barrel thing. After the game over, it's forgetting these barrel things. So that's something I need to worry about, actually. Globals, I think, is fine, right? Yeah, I'm not actually creating the path here. Where am I creating it? Here? Yep. This is a problem. Because what this is the room manager, when it's created, it does this. And I was expecting that when you do game over and you go back into the room, it would recalculate this. But it is not, I think. Let's just check and see if this fixes that. our game over. No. Bad cowboy. It seems to be this stuff. You know, once again, it seems like I'm not understanding the way MP Grid is working. Because for some reason, I'm going to the game over screen, and when I do that and start over again, next room, restart room, check next, different room. Yeah, I don't want it to restart the current room. There's something in these global variables, isn't there? So, room manager, room start. But I am doing this again when the room starts. Let's get rid of that for now. When I get to game over, what did I call it? Move path? Global room grid. I don't think this will actually help my cause, but let's just try. No, that did not help my cause. Yeah, now for some reason, when I'm starting over, it's remembering something, but it's not remembering enough. It's not remembering these barrels are supposed to be there. Maybe it's in here. Destroy instance. Let's do some housekeeping to make sure everything's working properly, because none of these things should exist after the room's destroyed. Could very well be this stuff too. Room and destroy. Yeah, just in case. Room and destroy. Is there anything else? Bullet drops, yeah, let's make sure those are gone when the room ends. Move node, let's make sure those are gone when the room ends. Because there's something left over that's screwing it up, and I need to make sure that that's gone. Room node, move node, enemy node. Let's make sure those are gone when the room ends. Hopefully I don't get to some bug when I get game over. No, none of that stuff helped. Why are they not seeing those barrels anymore? That is really, really, really weird. because it's doing something in here. Barrel. Maybe this is something I should look up in debug mode. I don't know. Yeah, the barrels are gone. Let's see, what is in here? This is probably the first time I've used the Game Maker debugger on the show. I did start using it in my overtime last week to try and figure this stuff out. Room grid is 0. Yeah, zeroed that out. Enemy path doesn't exist as far as I can tell. Let's get rid of that. Show instances. I've got game over, the game over object, and the system object, which is fine. I've got enemy nodes. I've got 4 barrels. Wow, that is really weird. But that is a bug, so I will look that up over the course of the week, since it's not that crucial. Let me add that to my to-do list here. Why is this acting so weird? Please stop doing that. Okay. So game over, restart, path fix. And I'm going to make that an hour because that seems like it'll take some time to fix. And that is a game design issue. This is also a game design issue, so I should probably label it properly. That's also a game design issue. Okay, well, the enemies do come off the screen. Now I just need an approach indicator to show that they're coming onto the screen. Probably want that indicator to appear above the node that they're about to approach. What's the best way to go about that? Probably the node they're about to approach, unless I want to change those around. Yeah, there's always the chance I could change those grids around. Well, let me show you what I'm talking about here. I turned enemy shooting off, by the way. These nodes around here, I could have the indicator appear on top of these and point down, but that's probably not exactly what I want to do, because I might later on want to change these around to make the enemies move differently. So it's probably going to be based on where the enemy is coming onto the screen. And since I want arrows, let's see, since I want arrows to appear, pointing in the direction that the enemy is about to come from, or actually pointing from where the enemy is about to come from, I'm going to need to know whether it's a right-facing arrow or a left-facing arrow and all that stuff. That's probably not too tricky, but let's make those arrows first. So let's do that first. So let's head on over to Photoshop and make a quick arrow. First thing I'm going to want to do is bring in my Commodore 64 palette in here. so I don't use any colors that weren't on the original Commodore 64. And I do want to stick with my original resolution, which is 24 by 21, which is the original Commodore resolution, and stretch it in GameMaker, because my ultimate goal is to stretch those automatically to fit the resolution. I probably do have to make two sets of sprites, one for 16 by 9 and one for 4 by 3, aspect ratio. But I can worry about that later. First thing I want to do is get rid of the background. Next thing I want to do is create the arrow. Probably the color I want the arrow is something very visible. Don't want to go all the way to black, do I? Let's go with purple. No. There's actually an interesting way to do this. Project Spaghetti, Bad Cowboy. I should probably actually make the arrow the same color as the enemy. That way, in the future, what I could do is if the enemies are different colors to indicate different types of enemies, I could also make the arrow indicate that. Which might not be too bad an idea. One, two, three, four, 1, 2, 3, so it's not quite balanced. But that's fine because it's 21 as opposed to an even number, so that's expected. And to make these arrows stand out more, I'm going to outline them in black. Oops. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so, as you can see up there, it's going to look like that when it's done. Just to make it look a little less forceful here. Okay. Well, now let's keep that in there. So let's make that our Bad Cowboy indicator. Actually, do we want to do separate pictures for left and right? Probably not. So just let's make this the one for left and right. Do that. Create a PNG for it. Yeah, I don't want to copy, I just want that. And I'm also going to want to create one for going up and down, because the resolution's not a perfect square, so I might need to change the arrow based on what the resolution is. Let's change that angle to 90. Well, let's see. 180, 90, minus 90. Okay, so what I think I want to do then is shrink this down a little bit, because I want the same arrow graphic for all of them. So let's shrink this part down. And move this a little bit. So that it's in the middle. Okay. Now let's see what happens when I rotate this. Oof, that's annoying. Thank you, Photoshop. I did not need you to do that. Sigh. Well, that's really annoying. How about we just rotate the whole thing and change the resolution? Because what Photoshop's doing is it's doing all this aliasing for me, and I don't want it to do that. Counterclockwise. And change the image size to 24 by 21. I don't want to keep this aspect ratio, thank you. How do I turn that off? Thank you. 24 by 21. Are you serious? Alright, canvas size, my bad. By 21. Yep, that's fine. Should move it up first. Okay, now it's theoretically in the middle. There we go. And I do need to shift it over to the right a little bit here. Okay, there we go. I'll bump it up to the top too. And I will make this the up-down indicator. That way I have two variations. I can flip left and right and up and down without worrying about it, but I can't, obviously, because of all the stuff that I just did in Photoshop. GameMaker wouldn't know what to do with that, so I have to create two versions, the up-down arrow and the left-right arrow. So now I've got my arrows. Need to add the sprites. It's an unfortunately long name, but so be it. Add sprites, file, create from file. That's up. And I need to remember to stretch that 200%. So that's my up. Let's have the origin in the center. Don't need collision checking at all. Duplicate, and let's call this sprite add cowboy indicator down. Edit the sprite, rotate it 180 degrees. So I've got up and down. Now I need to do left and right. Actually, it is already pointing to the right, so I need to fix this one. Well, let's see. I should probably think about it logically. Left means the enemy's coming from the left side of the screen, right from the right. Yeah, no, let's not do it that way. Because I will probably be thinking of the arrow directions in my head. So rotate 180 degrees. Okay, so up means just the arrow is pointing up. Down means it's pointing down. Left means it's pointing left. Right means it's pointing right. And I need to create objects for those. Okay, so now I have my arrows that I can use in the game. Next thing will be to actually have them display. So that's going to be in the room manager here, in that step, I think. Indicator equals instance creates rm spawn node. Rm spawn node x. Actually, I'm going to be right back. I do need to take a quick break. I haven't been drinking my water, so I need to do that. I will be right back. And I'm back. Thank you for waiting. Need to drink responsibly. Otherwise my voice is going to give out on me. So what I'm doing right now, is trying to add those enemy indicators to show where the new enemies are coming from the side of the screen. To do that, I do need to have... This needs to be the new enemy, actually. So the new enemy position, and then I need to offset that. This is where it kind of gets tricky. You know what? Maybe I should just make it the new node. And just always have nodes on the side of the screen, close to where the enemy comes onto the screen. Let's do that. EM node. So that's going to make things a lot easier. If I encounter the fact that that's not going to work for me, then I can worry about that later. And the thing I want to create is add cowboy indicator left. Let's just go with left for now. And I'm going to want to create a timer for that as well. Probably. Unless there's a wait function. No, let's do it with a timer first. Let's make this one alarm 1. And the number of steps is room speed times 1.5. So I want the arrow to appear for 1.5 seconds before I get rid of it. Instance destroy. Does it allow me to destroy other instances? Let me check. Interesting. There's a command to destroy the current instance, but there's not a command to destroy an external instance. Well, alright. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this in here anyway. Okay, let's change my logic up. No alarm in here. And so I think what I'll do instead is when I create this enemy indicator, creates, I'll set the timer inside of the actual arrow itself. That actually makes more sense, because why am I doing it in the room manager? That doesn't really make much sense. It should be a function of the arrow. It's actually good the game maker does that. Kind of has that restriction. So room speed times 1.5. Let's call it global arrow delay, indicator delay. when that alarm goes off, I want it to destroy this instance. Okay, and then before I forget, okay, and then I just need to copy all of this out. Actually, probably be just easier to do. Oops, no. Delete. Shift delete. Okay. It's probably going to be easier to just duplicate this because I've added all this extra stuff in here. And just change the sprite. Now obviously I haven't picked the right arrow direction yet. That's going to be the next step. I just want to make sure this process itself works first before I go into that. One step at a time, because if I try to do too many things at once, I'm going to end up with a bad problem on my hands. Okay, so now theoretically it should create an arrow indicator that only lasts for 1.5 seconds, and it should create just a left arrow at the first move node. Let's see what happens. Brilliant. Okay. I'm glad to see it actually works the way I was expecting it to. Obviously the arrow is always pointing left, so that's the next thing I have to fix. Where should I do that? Enemy node. What's the easiest way to do this? Should it be a function inside the enemy node? That doesn't really make sense. It shouldn't be in the move node either. So that should be something that's in here. Yeah, it should be in here. That does that. Determine. Determine. Oh, that's a good word. I wonder if that actually exists. Determine the arrow indicator direction. And to do that, let's see, if the enemy is spawning on the left side of the screen, then I want the right arrow actually. So the easiest way to do that's probably going to be to figure out whether the enemy is on the left or not. What should I do? Rim size, rim width. Divided by, let's see, for example, if my rim width is 640, actually 48, I want my sprite size to be the thing that indicates it. Sprite size. So rm new enemy sprite size, sprite width. It's probably not making much logical sense for those of you who are watching this, but you know, because I have the enemy, I've created a little buffer that's about the size of the enemy sprite. What I want this to be is to determine if the enemy is inside of that buffer, then I want the arrow indicator to determine that they're coming from the left. I only need to use rim size when I'm thinking about the right side of the screen. Actually, I didn't even need a down arrow because the enemies are never going to be coming from that town, but yeah, it's good to have around. So this means they're coming from the left, which means I want that indicator to be on the right. RM enemy indicator. Whoops. Indicator arrow. Let's call it that. Right. Okay, that's fine for that case. Now let's do the case if they're on the right side of the screen. It's greater than RM room width plus this, I guess. And then I want the left one. Else there should only be 3 cases, but and if it's coming from the bottom, I want up. Well, let's see what this does. May or may not work. Let's stop the enemy from shooting. Okay, so the condition for the right side of the screen is not working. So I do need to fix that. So maybe I should just make this room width then. Maybe that's enough. In fact, it probably is. Let's stop the enemy shooting with F3. Wow. They're randomly coming from the left an awful lot. Still not enough. Wow. That is really weird. That is really, really weird. I don't understand why that's the case. Should I do room width minus the right? Wonder how many enemies I can get on the screen before this crashes. That'd be a fun experiment. Yep. Well, we know that's not working, so let's just fix it. Apparently that condition is still not working, so let's subtract RM new enemy sprite width and see if that's enough to get me where I need to go. Hopefully. Oh yeah, stop the enemy from shooting here. There we go. Okay. So now that's fine. And let's see. In the future, I'm going to want these arrows to flash, so that's a task I need to add as well. That cowboy approach indicator animation. And that's not going to take too long at all, but it is a task for another day, because that's not very important. Actually, that's rough animation, polished animation. Let's get rid of these. Because I don't think I need a rough animation step for something like that. Okay, so I do have the approach indicator system. I do have, oh, actually these are done. I have these two done. I do have an enemy pattern. Actually, that needs a little bit of work. And it's going to tie into this other task, which is a win condition. Because right now I just have the enemy spawning every 5 seconds forever, which is not what I want to do. What's a good way to go about this? To determine if it's level 1 or not. So we start at level 1. And we can worry about that later. Occurrence level in the game. But what we're going to do for now is, if that level is 1, we're going to create a pattern for that based on that. And that's probably going to be setting these alarms and everything else. Yeah, that's fine every time. The alarm, the stuff it does is fine. It's just this that needs to change. So let's see. If global's current level equals 1, then actually I should do this in the creates. What am I doing here? Creates. Since I want all this information to set something up, room enemy count is equal to, let's say, 5. So 5 enemies. Let me check out how to do an array really quick in GameMaker script. To see what the syntax for it is. Yeah, I don't need a 2-dimensional array. Well, actually, yeah, probably do need a 2-dimensional array. Because in the future I'm going to want to have other enemies besides just that bad enemy. So it's probably a good habit to get into fixing that now. So let's make 0, 0 bad cowboy. So let's make that the object type, and enemy array 0, 1. Let's make this the time before it appears. So let's set that to 0. Right now, since I only have one enemy, these are all going to be the same. Make the first delay 5 seconds. I don't need this anymore. 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 enemies. First one's 5 seconds. Let's make the next one 3 seconds. The next one 4 seconds, and the last one like 1 second or something, so it appears like right off the bat. And change those to 2, 3, 4, 4. And actually I can make this enemy count the size of the array to save me a step. So GameMaker array size length size, I guess was what I was looking for. Okay, there's just a size of function. You know, the only reason I'm doing this instead of saying just 5 is because it could prevent bugs later. Like if I add an enemy here and forget to change this, then I'm going to be running into bugs that I don't know the answer to or something like that. So it's just safer to do this. This way it is automatically the size of this array. So these are the number of enemies I have, and these are the pattern anyway. So I need to remember this. Let's see. Let's copy this part. And let's do a quick if. I keep forgetting where that is. Let's do a quick if at the top. If enemy count let's see, enemy count. What do I want this to be? I want to check if the RM kill count, which I'll set up later, is equal to the enemy count. If it is, then I want to move to the room, if I can find it. I want to jump to the room. Well, let's go with game over for now, just so I have something in there. Let's call this room victory. Just so I remember that it's there, and it's not the same as game over. But it's going to have the exact same function, because later on I'm going to need a level manager that goes through the different levels or whatever, but for now it's just game over, that's fine. So let's edit that, go to room victory. Okay, so if the kill count is that, so I need to have a variable called kill count, obviously. Rm kill count, and it starts at 0. And every time a bad cowboy dies, I need to increment that. Room manager kill count equals that plus 1. Okay, now I need to start using that array. Let's copy both of those. And I need to do that in the creation thing here. Actually down here. Alright, so by the time I'm coming into here, it means that I'm ready to create the next thing. Which means I'm also going to need to keep track of the current enemy. So let's create a variable for that. And my array starts at 0, so 0 is fine. RM current enemy. A lot of things going on at the same time here, so hopefully I don't mess it up too badly. Before I forget. Okay. So now, instead of bad cowboy, let me paste this out so I know where it is. So now instead of bad cowboy, I want this. And this has to be RM current enemy. So that should create the first new enemy in the list. And obviously the array should probably also have something in here as well, but you can worry about that later. Instance create, that's fine. The only other thing I need to do is set the timer to be based on this. So let's move the timer before this code. And instead of room speed times 1.5, instead of room speed times 5, I want this to be room enemy array, room current enemy, and 1, which is the number of seconds that are in there. Let's see if this works. Size of. Okay, so size of doesn't work. Alright, so obviously I should have kept going. Alright, I did need another parameter in there apparently. Yeah, this is fishy because I don't see size of like showing up in any special colors. So I suspect that function doesn't even exist. Really? I somehow doubt that GameMaker does not come with a way to determine the size of an array. That would be really weird. That's pretty fishy too. Let's see what happens. Array length. Maybe that's what I want. Let's find out. Okay, so let's turn the enemy shooting off. So I should have 5 enemies coming in here, theoretically. Looks like just the one. Okay, so the alarm's probably not going off properly. Set alarm 1 to room speed times 5. Alarm 2, whoops, looking in the wrong place. What is this? Room speed times 1.5. I don't understand what this is. What did I put in here for? 1.5. That's the length of the arrow. Okay, that's just leftover stuff. Alright, I can get rid of that. So, alarm 0 set to that. Let's move this after the code, actually. RM enemy spawn is equal to 1. Let's set this to equal to 0 at the beginning. So this should be 0. Current enemy should be 0, right? RM current enemy. Yep. So that should be 0, 1 times room speed before alarm 0 goes off, which means it's okay to spawn. Let's move this down to the bottom, if it lets me. Okay. Room speed, spawn set to 1. That's fine. If it's 1, which means the alarm has gone off, then come in here, set that to 0 first, and then come in here and do this stuff. RM current enemy goes up 1. It should theoretically work. Interesting. Let me try this in debug mode, see if I can see those variables. Room enemy array doesn't seem to exist. Or it's just really, really crazy. Enemy count is 2. Current enemy. Okay, well that's one thing I've obviously got wrong. First thing I have, let's find it. So maybe I need, do I need to define this array? If global current level is equal to 1, yeah, I think it is coming in here. Count is still 2 for some reason. It is not getting that array length properly. Enemy spawn is just 0. Enemy array is weird. Current enemy is 0. Yeah, something's obviously not going with this array the way I expect it to. Let's see, I keep coming into here because that's where I want to go into, but it's actually here. Let me add some comments, because every time I come in here I'm trying to remember where I put what. The path. Okay, well at least now it's commented so I can see what's going on. This array is not working the way I expect it to, for some reason. RM current enemy is equal to 0, and this is 1, so that should be getting the right value. Theoretically. Maybe I should just do 1D, I don't know. don't know what that's going to return, but let's find out. Because it's returning 2, and that's just wrong. Oops, forgot to do this in debug mode. Enemy count still 2 no matter what. I don't know what the heck is going on with this enemy array thing. Show instance variables. Room manager. Yeah, enemy array is really, really weird. I don't know what's going on with that. Obviously, whatever I'm doing with the arrays is causing a problem. So I'm going to leave that debugging for next time, or, you know, some overtime. But let's see. I do have the win condition, so that's fine. Theoretically, anyway. Let's just check to make sure that is okay. It's just this alarm that's kind of going wrong, so let's go ahead and get one enemy out there so I can make sure that the count is going up properly. Okay, well, the win condition's fine. It's just the way it's picking from that array that's causing a problem. RM current enemy. Maybe I should just move this up to the top or something. Just to make sure that works. I am going to comment this out because that array length is not working the way I want it to. Let's drop this back to 0 and see what happens. So I'm manually entering the array length. Let's see if that does anything for me. Now for some reason I can't shoot. That's another bug to fix. 1, 2, 3. Variable index 5, 1 out of range. Well, that's a problem. Okay. That's first problem. Let's fix this to be that. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. Set current enemy to 1. I may need to create a blank something or other at the end of that array. Three. Yeah, now it's 6. Okay. keep coming into bad cowboy. Okay, actually, it's not good to do that, because that could create bugs later. What I want to do is change it in here. And I want a condition on this alarm. If RM current enemy is greater than, what is it? Enemy count. Is greater than or equal to enemy count. So if it's 5, if it's reached 5, then one, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I did get 5 enemies, and it did stop. Did reach the end. Okay, good. That is a good stopping point. It's just the array size thing that I need to look up a little bit. Once I get that figured out, that'll be fine. So let's close that down. I do have the ability to put in an enemy pattern now, and I do have a win condition. What I do need to do, let's put all those back into episode 9 because that's everything I did this episode. Got quite a bit done, it looks like. Let's move that over here, and let's create next week's episode card. Shift that over here. Yeah, the Trello interface is going to get kind of annoying once I have too many episodes going. Okay. So looking back on what I did have an approach indicator system. I do have sprites. They do appear correctly. I can set up an enemy pattern, have enemies appear every X number of seconds, and I can pick the type of enemy that appears. Right now I only have bad cowboy, but that's fine because in the future I'll have, big bad cowboy or whatever it is. And then I have the win condition. If you shoot the number of enemies that are supposed to appear in the level, it goes to the victory screen, which right now is just the game over screen because I don't actually have, other levels to shoot the player to. That's fine. So that is working, but I do need to debug the arrays. Array. So spawn room manager array count debug. I imagine that's not going to take too long because at worst case comes to worst case, then I can probably just use a function that just loops through the array and gives me a count, because obviously it's just that array count thing that's not working for me the way I expect it to. Whatever that array length means, who knows? Maybe it's like counting the number of bytes in it or something, I don't know. So that's something I do need to fix. I'll probably do that, just over time. Or at least I'll look it up how to do it. So next week, now that the enemies are coming onto the screen, shooting at the player, etc., the enemies are almost done, but they're too easy to kill. As you can see, once I had those indicator arrows, I could just, figure out where they're coming from, shoot at them, and then they're just dead before they even have a chance to shoot at me. That's alright, I suppose, for a very, very basic enemy, but I kind of want to give them the ability to dodge simple bullets. Like if the bullet's just going at the gray speed, I want them to be able to dodge that. That's going to be part of what makes the enemies different from each other. Some are going to be able to dodge better than others. I'll probably set it up so that different colored enemies, you can tell which ones are more powerful or not. The red ones are my basic ones for now, but as basic as they are, I still want them to be able to dodge the basic, there's a gray bullet coming at me, duck. If they happen to be close to the edge of the screen and it hits them on the rebound, good for the player. Or if the bullet's going too fast for them to dodge, in the case of like when it turns yellow and red and all that, then they can't dodge. Or if two bullets are coming at them at the same time and they dodge this one but pop up just in time to get hit by this one, all's the better. That's part of the strategy of the game. But I do want to give them the basic dodge, which is the same thing the player has, so that you can't just, pick them off. And one other thing I do need to do before I start setting up other types of enemy types is right now I'm doing everything inside of this bad cowboy object, but what happens if I want to create another type of cowboy or another, like a zombie or a ghost or something like that? All of these need to be parented to an object called enemy, so that most of the logic is up here in enemy, but it's just the specific like sprites and parameters that are inside of these things that are kind of hanging off of that parent object. So before I can get to this badder cowboy stuff, that's what I'm going to have to do. And hopefully action shooting is probably not going to be very much to do, but I do need to create a sprite. And let's see, is there anything else from here I can pull out? No, I think that's pretty good. If I do get ahead of myself in episode 10, then I'll just pull some more out from here. But for next episode, I'll fix that array count thing. I'll get the bad cowboys dodging. I'll shift all of the... Actually, this is going to take a lot longer than I'm thinking. Because I have to move logic around and stuff. So that's going to be fine. The bad cowboy action shooting, that's not going to take as long as an hour. I can adjust these estimates based on, past performance or whatever. But that should be enough. Get another enemy type out there so that the player has some variety. That'll be what I'll do next episode. And that's going to wrap it up for me. It has been a longer episode because I did have the long introduction, so, just to make sure that I get a good amount of work done, I did stretch it out a bit. I do this every Saturday, my time, which is in Japan, Saturday morning from 8 to 10. If you're in the States, it's still daylight savings time, so I think the States, it's 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, 5 to 7 Mountain, 6 to 8 Central, 7 to 9 Eastern. For your Friday night, you can stop by. If you're in the UK, it goes from midnight to 2 a.m. on Saturday. Friday late night, Saturday early morning. And if you're in Japan with me, it's 8 to 10 on Saturday morning. If you're in Australia, I think it's it starts from 9 to 11 depending on where you are in Australia. And if you're in New Zealand, I believe it's around noon on Saturday when the show starts. You can catch me anytime you want at youtube.com Tengu Studio. You can see all the old episodes. And if you can stop by Twitch, that's Twitch TV Tengu. If you want to know when things are happening, the easiest way to do that is to go over to Twitter and follow me at Tengu. And you can also come to the site to see what we're doing, which is www.bluetengu.com. What else? Facebook.com Tengu Studio. And that's about it. Also, I should have a little time this weekend to do an unplugged episode, so if you want to vote on which one I do next, as you can see up here, I've got them all queued up. There's Master Reboot, Depths of Fear Gnosos, and Game Dev Tycoon. Yeah, I may get through them all, but be sure to vote. I'm definitely going to do Cleanup Detail Shadow Warrior because I played Shadow Warrior last time, and it's only right that I clean up after myself. it's going to make sense for those episodes to be kind of next to each other. So I'll do that first, but whatever I do after that, you guys vote on over at the site www.bluetengu.com. And that's going to do it for me this week. I will see you next week and hopefully have some variety going with the enemies. And thank you for watching. I will see you next time.